I think we'll get started then. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. We are super excited to be broadcasting today.
Woohoo!
And improve. Yes, exactly. Using learning content analytics to drive success. And by success, we're talking about success for your learning content, for your learners, for the perceived value of and worth of L&D within your organizations. And if you get all that right, ultimately, for your business too. We're going to start off with a bit of a question. Cami.
Yeah, what would better data from your learning initiatives mean for you and your organization? Why don't you just chat something in the chat box while we're getting people logged in and up and running? It'd be great to hear what this means for you and your organization. We hear a lot about data and analytics right now, but what does it really mean? Feet on the street.
We'll go through the admin as well and how you do this, but you all, I'm sure, attended many of these webinars before. So yeah, get the conversation going. What would better data from your learning initiatives mean for you? And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to go through a bit of a background on who we are, just in case you don't know. So we all work for Kineo, which is a global workplace learning company that helps your businesses improve performance through learning and technology. We invest heavily in research and innovation, and we're constantly exploring new ways of doing things. We're all passionate about learning technology and how data can help our clients become heroes to their organizations to prove their worth and discover areas to improve their learning, which of course we hope brings greater value to their learners and their businesses. Crucial subject matter for times like these, I'm sure you'll agree. Bringing the expertise alongside me today are Matt Meller, Learning Strategy and Digital Design Team Lead. Say hello, Matthew.
Hi.
Pete Smith, Global Tech Team Lead.
Good afternoon.
Myself, Andy Costello, I'm Head of Customer Solutions here at Kineo EMEA, and my counterpart from the US, who you've already heard from, and published author of the soon-to-be-released updated version of The Accidental Learning Designer, well worth a read. Cami Bean, how you doing, Cami?
Hey, all. Great to be here today. All right, so what are we going to talk about today? We've got a full schedule and agenda today. We're going to talk about the role of learning content analytics in learning, how to use data to improve those learning experiences. You're all typing your answers furiously into the chat, and hopefully we'll hit on a bunch of those points as we go through this. How learning analytics can help businesses make better decisions. That's really what data is all about, is using evidence to help us make better decisions in the workplace. And ultimately how L&D can use data analytics to build credibility and show value. We often hear people talking about, we want a seat at the table, right? Having that evidence, having that data is going to help us get that seat at the table. And really leverage our value within the organization.
Thank you, Cami. Yeah, the chat seems to be building. Good stuff. Some housekeeping. We've got lots to get through today, but I just need to cover a few points. The session is being recorded. I hope that's okay with everybody. Everybody is on mute. You can say hi in the chat if you want to. Slides will be sent to all attendees alongside the recording of this webinar after the fact. Please add your questions into the question function on the control panel. And if the session cuts off, the nightmare for none of us want, please use the original webinar link to gain access back into the session. You can also join over the phone, select phone call if you want to do that in the audio panel, and the dial-in information will be displayed. If any of us cut out, we apologize in advance, but we will cover and manage it, as hopefully you won't need to see. Cami, back to you. Let's start with a question.
Yeah, I always like to start with a question. Why analytics and why L&D? Why is this important technology for the L&D industry? Let's look at some data. Let's look at, great place to start, right? This year, we've seen some studies that show 49% of organizations are going to be spending less on L&D programs this year as a result of the economic downturn. We could probably see we can see this out in the world. Companies are laying people off, and L&D is often the first that gets cut. Meanwhile, as we look at this next piece of data, 16% of organizations say they don't have the data to really evidence that, right? They're not able to, or only 16%, sorry, are able to identify and track a series of metrics about L&D. So if we do the math, what's that? 84% of organizations don't have that capability right now. It's a huge gap. And finally, 93% of organizations say they want better analytics and intelligence as a priority for 2023. What's a girl to do, right? I mean, there's a lot of competing factors right now. How are we going to get better data when our teams are getting cut, budgets are getting cut? So we're going to start with a quick poll. Well, not start. We've already started. how would you rate your organization's ability to evidence the impact of learning initiatives on a scale from 1 to 5? So thinking right now, real point in time, where is your organization on this? So 1 is low and 5 is high. We'll keep this open for 30, 40 seconds, and then we will share the results.
How would you rate your organization's ability to evidence the impact of your learning initiatives, your learning programs? If you're working in L&D, that's pretty much everything you do. Interesting things fluctuating there. 18%, let's say low. Nobody on high, from what I'm seeing, which is good for us and for this webinar. Means we don't have to go home just yet. I think there's things that we can probably add to the conversation. Keep them coming, keep them coming.
Well, we've got some people along the maturity curve there. 43% say you're at 3. So we're getting there. That's good. Building those chops.
Yeah, I mean, this taps in, doesn't it, to stuff that we're hearing about all the time, and it's resonating with so many people. It's what we've heard in Donald Taylor's recent report, and the Fosway group recently also announced their results and their recent report, which talks about the same thing, that analytics is a huge deal at the moment, and L&D needing to prove its value, to show its worth to its organizations. So let's talk a little bit more about what learning content analytics is and how it works. Just a last look at these. 43% in the middle. Okay, so everyone has room for improvement here, and are holding, I hope, holding their businesses to account. At least that's what we want to give you the tools to be able to do. If you could take the poll down now, please. And Matt, I'm going to pass to you for the next slide and to bring some context into the session.
Thank you, Andy. So we're talking about learning content analytics today, but what do we mean exactly by analytics? So our data is all those bits and pieces that we collect. It's the assessment scores, it could be the time spent or completion rates, but on its own, it doesn't have a great deal of meaning. What analytics does is it allows us to systematically capture and analyze data. So it's tools and techniques that allow us to discover new patterns, to interpret that data differently, and give us meaningful insights that we can then action. So this is really important for L&D because it allows us to make those better decisions and ultimately improve the performance of our organizations. So let's have a look at how this actually compares to what a lot of us have been using for many years and still do, and that's the traditional SCORM reporting. So our SCORM reporting tends to be that raw data that we get around who did what. So that's really on the individual level. So looking at the details of the learner, did they complete that learning? What was the score? And how long did it take to complete them? And that's limited insight that we can get from that requires quite a lot of manual processing. Now, learning content analytics builds on top of this. So it's not a replacement, but it builds on top of our normal tracking to look at those wider how and why trends. So aggregating data perhaps from multiple courses, looking at the activity within the experience. So you could think about learning as a sealed box with SCORM. You can't really see what's happening within it, but learning content analytics is more about those granular interactions, and then looking at the averages, trends and patterns. And the output from this are interactive dashboards. So the sort of things that we've been used to seeing in web and marketing, things like Google Analytics, giving you visualizations that show the correlations, the patterns and the trends, and over time as well. So you get that wider insight via much easier to use visualization tools. So back to you, Cami.
Yeah, well, it's really thinking about what are those problems that we can solve with better analytics. And I just want to point out, Scott had a comment that I think is important to come back to. You've been reading that completion on its own is not enough, and that's right. I mean, that's kind of what we get out of SCORM data. It's that butts in seats metric. Excuse the crassness there, but knowing that someone completed a course does not have any indication on how well that course did in meeting the need, and any insights into the experience itself. So we're trying to go a little deeper. So we've got another poll here to think about what problems we can solve. What's your biggest L&D challenge? Is it cutting down seat time? People are spending a lot of time in mandatory training at organizations, and that's money. That's money to build it. That's money for your learners to take it. Is it improving learner satisfaction, making sure that these are more engaging courses? Is it showing that learning is more effective or effective at all? Are we trying to predict behavior change? What's your biggest challenge at your organization?
Good.
And Andy, you might be seeing the results in real time. I'm not. So what's your...
That'll explain it. Yes, I can see them coming in. Hopefully everybody else can see these too. So what's winning by far at the moment is showing learning is effective. 67% are looking to prove the effectiveness of their learning. Pretty even split between improving learner satisfaction and predicting behavior change. Cutting down seat time is actually quite low, only 4% at the moment, which surprises me. This is something we hear a lot from our clients in particular, and is a constant challenge for mandatory learning providers. When you're taking people out of their busy day-to-days, their everyday jobs, the challenge that they always face is, how can you make people compliant so that they are able to do their jobs legally and through the correct regulatory approval, but with minimum time away from their jobs, with minimum seat time in the learning. That's what we mean by seat time. So that's quite low for me, 4% on that. The biggest one, 68% now, showing learning is effective. Is by far the biggest challenge. So I'll move along. Coming back to you.
Yeah, lots of challenges. So as we think about getting better evidence out of the learning experiences that we are designing and building, what are the stakeholders that we need to consider? And we'll kind of go through a quick stakeholder map here to help you think about how better data can ground it, right? So learning leaders want to make better decisions, where to invest the right resources to know that they're having the biggest impact. So that's your CLOs, that's your managers. Where should we be focusing our budgets? Learning designers want to use this data to make better learning experiences that are more learner-centric, right? So we want to look at the evidence of what works. Hey, everyone is devouring these videos that we're creating, and that's a great place to spend our energy. And we know that people are dropping out of the course halfway through, and therefore the rest of this course maybe we need to trim down. So what can we find out? What insights can we glean for learning designers? Think about those business content owners. So they want to know what's engaging their employees. What are the gaps that need greater attention? Where do people continue to make mistakes? And I think there was a comment in the chat kind of about that, right? We want to focus on where people need to improve the most. So where are those gaps? And then finally, learners want more engaging, relevant, meaningful experience. And learners, I bet, want shorter seat time. So what's the data helping inform for those stakeholders?
Great, thank you. So yeah, lots to think about. In a moment, we're going to look through some realistic examples of how learning content analytics works in practice and how learning professionals will benefit. But before that, we wanted to look at how collecting extra data within your learning content can drive continuous improvement for L&D, help you make better evidence-driven decisions, all the things we hope that will feed into those challenges that you've all identified. So Matt, back to you, please.
Sure. So if you consider your average project process, this could be an e-learning project, it could be a program, you're going through pretty much three main stages there. So you're starting off by trying to understand that challenge, identifying that problem in the first place, then prototyping and iterating solutions wherever we want to kind of pilot with learners, and we want to make changes where we need to, and then we make that decision at the end if that's something that's working, we want to scale that up, or we need to go back and revise it. And if we just filter this down a bit, we can start to see points where data from analytics or analytics itself can be really useful in this type of process. So that can be from understanding the challenge, actually looking at the previous successes or gaps that you've identified through measuring previous programs, and then into the prototype and iterate, really building that business case and looking at what we need to do for the learner and the KPIs that we need to measure, and then looking at what we actually want to measure against when we do that user testing. And this gives us a lot of insight then into how we then react to what we've learned in that process, whether we do scale up or whether we pivot and revise that to something else. But of course, we can do this not just over one project, but we can take that learning into the next one as well. So continually learning and improving our outputs based on the insights we get from analytics can be really, really effective.
Thank you, Matt. Another question, Kemi. Oh, you're muted.
I have a bit of a cold, so I'm sipping my tea, and I didn't want you all to hear me slurping. I apologize.
No worries.
All right, so another question we'll just ask you in the chat here. What's your biggest barrier to adopting analytics? What's holding you and your organization back? And I bet there's a lot of different answers to this. Robert Carter is saying platform limitations. Tina, yes, this will be recorded. Please write into chat if you can. We're resourcing, right? So it's not having the right people, perhaps, or not all the data is digital. That's a good one. Willingness to adopt change. This feels like a new skill set for a lot of our teams, doesn't it? Especially for L&D.
Yeah. There's a good one here for Jeffrey Young. Unsure which indicators or data points to look at. Ditto with resourcing. Just a quick one, Tina. You've asked about the recording being available. Absolutely. All this will be shared after the fact. But yeah, keep your thoughts coming, and we'll be coming back to these at the end. There'll be a further Q&A session, but we'll be revisiting these points as well. So thank you for keeping
Will
the conversation.
Thalheimer, welcome, Will. Yeah, he's got. If you don't know Will Thalheimer, the LTEM learning transfer evaluation model is a great model. We're sticking away from evaluation models here, Will, but really glad to see you here. I think you're absolutely right. People have that lack of skill, knowledge in learning evaluation. It feels mystifying. I'm really good at writing a learning objective, but now I have to talk about data. Interestingly, I think the ATD has a capability model for learning teams to look at, and data and analytics is kind of historically is the weakest for teams and organizations. This is not our standard skill set in L&D. So we've got some work to do in this area.
Great. I have moved the slide on, I hope, Cami. So what's holding organizations back?
Yeah, so these are some of the things that we're seeing, right? So it's identifying the potential. People kind of feel like it's this black box. I don't know what to do with all this data. What's the potential for data? There are these limits to SCORM, right? Butts in seats. I can tell that you completed a course and you got 80% on the final exam. You know, whoop-de-doo. What does that tell us about anything? There's that internal expertise in analyzing data. So maybe we've captured all this data. Now teams don't know what to do, because analytics is a whole skill set. It's finding the story, it's pulling the threads out of the data to understand what correlations and causes you can make, knowing what data to collect, to your point about what data points. The cost of analytics solutions, right? Is this a whole nother system we have to get? Is this a whole nother platform? We'll talk a little bit about XAPI in this, which was going to be the holy grail of cracking the nut on analytics. But now you need an LRS, a learning record store. It feels like it's prohibitive stuff we're talking about. And then how do we tell that story? How do we present that data in a compelling way when this is not our core skill set, right? So there's a lot that's holding organizations back.
Absolutely, and we need to bust those myths. So I'm going to bring in Mr. Pete Smith now to talk through some use case studies and how we are helping clients to overcome these barriers, just as a case in point. Pete, hello.
Hello. Yeah, harking back to the previous slide, actually, what has been holding us back quite a lot? I sympathise with those people who in the chat said platform limitations, because that's been a really big barrier for us. We obviously have a platform side to the business, but on the learning content side, the vast majority of our courses end up on a client's learning management system. And not only do we obviously have no access to the data, but actually we do quite often find that our clients don't have access to the data. So that's been a challenge to us that we've been looking to solve over the last 5 years or so, where we've been down a bit of a journey from starting out to use third-party tools like Google Analytics to get extra analytics data alongside any data which our clients could provide. And really, the reason for wanting that data is, again, it's very much reflects the responses to the polls, where it's to demonstrate the effectiveness of the courses that we create and also improve the effectiveness, because until you actually start measure whether a course is having the impact that you want it to, then you can't really start to learn from previous courses and actually start to improve what you do on an iterative course-by-course basis. And as learning professionals, learning designers, that's what we're all about. So we've actually created, well, we've created two things. One is a framework, which Matt's going to be walking through shortly. And the other is a piece of technology which my team have been working on, which is very much inspired by Google Analytics. It takes a very similar approach. So the idea is that our content will still be hosted entirely in a learning management system, but we have a means of communicating with a tool that we're calling Kineo Data Services, which just sits quietly in the background and receives anonymous data about how learners are behaving in a course. We analyze that data and push it out into a dashboard, which we can access, which our clients can access, and which hopefully gives useful insights into how well that course is performing. And also, just as a quick aside, we can use the same technology to provide interactions, functionality, which you can't get if you're just launching courses through SCORM using the SCORM API. So we've got a richer data set that we can draw on. Just to give you a few examples of what that looks like from a dashboard perspective, or what data we're capturing. These are the bits we're focusing on. So one of the reasons for dropping Google Analytics quite quickly was that it's very, very marketing focused. The data points that we need in e-learning are quite different, and we focus quite heavily, very understandably, on question responses. How well are people answering questions? How many attempts are people taking to answer questions? That, of course, rolls up into assessments. So again, the benefit of having something which is proprietary is we can build a technology which understands the course content and the structure of the course, which then means that we can pull data through from assessments. And we can do things like assess at the start, assess at the end, and find out how people's knowledge has increased. And we can do the same about more perception-based questions. What are people's, how conceptually are they thinking about subject matter at the start? How are they thinking at the end? Has the change that you've brought about across your audience met your learning objectives? And alongside that, of course, we get the other obvious analytics data. How are learners accessing the course? How long are they taking to access it? Are they taking the right amount of time? And all of this we can weave together to paint a bit of a picture of course impact and whether it's doing its job as a piece of training.
Thank you, Pete. Just before we move on, there was a comment in the chat that I thought was interesting. Ken Curry had mentioned Robert Carter pinpoints a key restriction that institutions, particularly universities, won't admit to, that they've invested in a platform technology that is impoverished, restrictive, and not up to the job. It's not just universities, I'm sure. Nobody wants to admit they've made a buying mistake or buying error, and perhaps they haven't. Maybe they just don't understand what it is they're trying to do with it. But that's why it's important to be able to try and make this as simple as possible, isn't it? And remove all barriers and bust those myths and make it as accessible as possible too.
Indeed, to stand up for the platforms a little bit.
Yes, sorry, go on.
We tend to be quite e-learning focused or content focused when we talk about these things. And the platforms, of course, are doing a much broader job. So they're often dealing with face-to-face training. You need to get data from a lot of different sources.
Absolutely. And of course, this is a learning content analytics webinar, I should say as well, just in counter defense of where you go with that, Pete. Matt, I'm going to bring you back in, please. This is a really interesting approach that we adopted, and hopefully will be useful for everybody as well. Thinking in 4 dimensions. Please expand.
Yeah, sure. So as we noted before, data is just data unless you add some meaning to it. So one of the parts of the journey that we went on was looking at how we can organize the data and the insights that we get in a logical way. And so we came up with four dimensions to categorize this. Now, this applies to the approach that we've used, but it would also apply to anybody else using other methods to measure what's happening within their content. So to take you through these data dimensions in order, I think this will speak to some of the questions in the chat as well about measuring changes, etc. We can start with looking at competence. So we might want to measure things such as, and this is applied knowledge really, this is to point out. So it's looking at how well people apply knowledge in situations. So it's not just knowledge checks, it's looking at how we use things like scenarios and activities to really show that people have not just digested the words that we've given them, but they can apply this in situations. You know, all that good stuff that we aim for within good online learning. And this might be the different, we might measure this using techniques such as having questions or tests at the beginning and at the end of the learning to see what's changed. It could be actually aggregated across different learning experiences. So if you've got a program, if you're doing something that's spaced, you might be looking across multiple interventions there and seeing how people's performance in let's say scenario changes over a period of time. And what we can also do is categorize some of the questions we ask people or the activities that we give them against different learning objectives. So really looking at whether we are delivering on those performance goals that we have for learners and using that as a predictor. We can't measure using learning context analytics things that are actually happening on the job, but we can make a predictor as to whether people are capable of applying this in a competent way. Next, we've got perception, and this includes things like confidence. That's a great example. That's something you might want to ask quite often, is how confident do people feel before the learning and after? Have you given them content that actually makes them happier to go ahead and apply that in their role? They might have the knowledge there, they might have the skills, they might show the competence, but do they have the confidence? It really is two different things and two things that we want to measure. So we could ask them that. We could ask them about either general confidence of specific skills or how they rate the current level of mastery. But those are just some of the most common things, because perception can be many other things. You could ask them how they perceive certain situations, if they see things as useful, how they've approached different situations. So you can really get into the mindset of the learners and understand how they're thinking about the learning and the task. But this is particularly around the subject matter. This isn't about the reaction, which we'll come to in a second. We can look at the engagement, and this is the stuff that probably has more of an analogy with the sorts of things you'd expect through things like Google Analytics, which is looking at what they're doing, how long they're doing it for, are they coming back again, what are the completion rates. We can go a bit further and be more specific in certain learning areas, as Pete said, around that. But this is really understanding how people are interacting with that learning. And then finally, our fourth dimension here, and that is understanding how learners actually feel about the learning as a learning package. Did they feel it was relevant? Did they find it useful? So the sort of thing that we're very used to doing and asking, you know, at the end of face-to-face sessions, we don't always ask it after e-learning, and we don't always get that same level of feedback. But it's still very useful. It's not the only way to evaluate, of course, as we all know. It's that, like, you know, that lower level of evaluation, but it's still really important to get that feedback from learners, and we can do that directly in the course in the learning potentially. So if we move on, what we can do is look at how some of these dimensions can work in practice in a couple of really...
Just touching back on one of the comments, Matt, sorry, if you don't mind. Catherine made
sure.
a point about behaviour change and how we measured that. And of course, Gary, you responded, it's the golden bullet, isn't it? Silver bullet, magic bullet, I never know which is the right analogy there. But you mentioned there the reaction dimension at the end there. You know, reaction isn't just about what did you think. You know, are you going to apply the learning in your day-to-day? Do you think this is going to change your behaviour? Again, of course, these are personal views in response to the learning they would have just undertaken. But it's on the way.
Yeah, and it's not fully to that. It's not tracked back to those actual KPIs. Like, how did they perform on the job? That's where you really want to see where the behavior changed, right? So we're not quite there yet either.
No.
Yeah, Catherine, you're absolutely right that the data, you can't prove it. The data, and even when you actually weave the learning content data in with empirical external data, you need to have a really good hypothesis so that you could actually test whether the learning has had an impact, because you also need to obviously isolate the learning from all other possible things that might have had an impact. So it's not easy, but the very first part of the journey is to assess what impact the learning has had. Because if you want to go down that route, if you want to demonstrate impact, you can't hope to do that until you've actually got a good idea of what learning impact looks like from the learner data perspective. And then you can start weaving it in with the rest of the data that you're collecting across all your other systems and other data sources.
And if you're using that data exactly to improve the learning design experiences that you're creating, the learning experiences you're creating, you're designing for those with those results in mind. Your design becomes evidence-based, which goes on towards the bigger, much bigger data picture.
Yeah.
Actually,
Andy, if we just go back up one slide, it'd be good to ask the audience a question here, and that's in your current work, in the work that you're doing, the learning that you create, is there one of these particular areas where you feel you've got the biggest gap in what you're able to capture? It'd be really interesting to know, just looking at those four, which of those areas you're excited about getting more data and more insights from.
Yeah, and just before I move back on again, Will, tell Amy you just left a nice bit of encouragement there. Thank you. Let's not beat ourselves up. It is very difficult and resource intensive to measure work behaviors and other outcome measures. That's comforting. Thank you. So true. Yeah, as Matt says, have a think of these pillars. You know, which ones resonate for you most? Competence, Robert Carter. Competence is a big one. Competence and perception, David. Thank you. Keep them coming. We're going to be revisiting back as we go through. But yes, what we wanted to do as well, of course, is not just talk, but show you a bit of analytics in practice. So, Matt, I'm going to pass back to you again with another use case.
Yeah, so let's take a look at some situations that might be familiar to some of you and look at, in these sorts of situations, how we might use analytics in order to have an impact. So we'll take Heather as our first example. Heather's in charge of a large portfolio of mandatory training at a bank. So that's those rollouts that are happening periodically, year in, year out. They're doing this training for regulatory reasons. But the HR department wants to know that this is delivered as concisely as possible. So really a focus on making sure that seat time is kept constrained and that it's effective. And the learners there, they need to know what to do and how to behave in a range of different situations. So if we imagine that's a bank, that could be, as I said, some regulated activities. That could be some core behaviors that are in response to particular imperatives and regulations specific to that bank. So some really important things there. They need the confidence to apply what they learn. So there's going to be subject matters like perhaps whistleblowing there, where we can tell people what the process is. Do they feel comfortable actually taking those steps and following that process? But because they're getting this learning year in, year out, they are perhaps just a little fatigued. They're getting that learning fatigue, and they've maybe seen a lot of the content before. So what are Heather's desired outcomes? Well, they want to focus future training on what learners need the most. They definitely want to do that. That's going to help our learners and the HR department there by reducing that seat time, but whilst making sure that all the training gaps are filled, which is going to be a big part of fulfilling that regulatory need. So let's look at how we can use those 4 data dimensions to categorize the type of data we might collect and the insights that we might get from that. So in the case of Heather, we could use pre-tests and post-tests. We could use that to find out what learners already know, and by reporting back on how people are answering questions, that can tell us what they're commonly getting wrong. What are the areas where they absolutely need that training versus what can we see people already know? Can we make this a more personalized experience? From a perception point of view, we want to make sure that they're confident. So are they confident going into the learning? Are they confident after? Is the learning actually having an impact on their level of confidence here and how they rate that? And does their confidence match their competence? So they might know this stuff. Are they confident putting it into practice? From an engagement point of view, we might want to know how long it's taken to complete. That's really important that we are accurately reporting that seat time, that we've got a good awareness of that. And we want to know where they're spending the most time and where they might be breezing through things very quickly. So again, we can start looking at personalizing that learning more. And from the point of view of reaction, we of course want to know, do they find it relevant and enjoyable? Are we beating that fatigue from seeing content year in, year out on the same subject? And do they intend to behave differently? So that's a really important one there. Is it really, are they identifying as having that behavior change? So Heather's example there was something where she's developing a program, a portfolio over time. So the learnings from one rollout that can inform improvements to the next one. Here we've got Ad, and he's got a different challenge here because he's going to be piloting something. He's got a global sales force, and they're all working in slightly different ways. They want that global sales language to be the same, so the customers have got a very consistent experience from region to region, and they need to be using the same terminology and processes, moving on from some siloed behaviors. And the training needs to be available on the move, potentially to slot in between face-to-face meetings. You know, they're telling us that they need to learn on the train, or sat on a bench waiting to go into a meeting. You know, we need to prepare for that. So as desired outcomes here are a pilot phase that can inform any changes to be made before full rollout, and something where you can compare the feedback from this to the feedback from the regional leads about how it's being applied, so we can see a real correlation between the two. So let's see how we can build this into the learning here. So to inspire this culture change, we can look at competence. So using scenarios or simulations, we can see whether learners can apply the preferred behaviors. And this is pretty good because we can make pretty blurry scenarios here. It's not a correct or incorrect answer. We're actually talking about sales simulations where we can give them 4 possible ways of working, and we've got 1 preferred way of working. So we can get a really good indication about how people are applying their sales skills and what situations. For perception, how do they feel about the new behaviors that they're asking from them? Do they think it's going to be useful? Do they think it's going to be beneficial for their customers? We can get this feedback through the learning. And we can also ask them this question right at the start. You know, when they're going in, do you think this is going to be useful for your customers? We can get them to do the learning, and then we can ask them the same question. And has that changed? Have we actually managed to persuade them through this learning? From an engagement, again, how long are they spending on this training? Is it in one sitting or in pieces? That's going to make a big difference to how we actually deliver this. But also, what devices are they using? Is it true that they're actually using mobiles for this? We can really interrogate whether we need to be working on a 3G connection, or can we give them richer experiences? Is it only 1% who are doing that on the mobile phone, or is it 20%? That will really, really influence the format of the training. So we can do that do the course of this pilot, and of course ask them again those questions. Did they find it relevant and enjoyable? Are we hitting those spots? Just because people complete the learning doesn't mean that they actually like the learning. So we can actually ask them those questions. And again, do they intend to behave differently? A really big one. So what we can do in this case, what Ad can do, is take the learning from the pilot with perhaps say 1 region, get this learning, and then apply it. Any learnings, any insights that we get from this to the wider rollout. So that takes us through 2 case studies. I'm sure some of those situations will be familiar to some of you, but I think one thing that we can take away from these kind of case studies is that we really need to apply what we learn. So the use of good content, learning content analytics, is not just about that one program or that one piece of learning. It's about gathering insights across a whole portfolio, and this can be across several years. In the case of Heather there, they were rolling learning out again and again. That can be improved. This can show us where to improve. And they don't always also help us form better hypotheses about what's going to work for the audiences, but they also help us to build a data story. And that's something that we've not touched on here, but being able to tell a compelling story to our stakeholders and the other people in the business about why we did what we did and what the results were is so important. So using data learning content analytics and the data and the insights to do that can be really transformative in that regard as well, in making that case about how you have proven your success and then again how we've improved along with that.
Thank you, Matt. Much appreciated. Wise words. Keep those questions coming. There's a lot in the chat and a lot in the Q&A. We'll be bringing my colleague Alex in a minute, who's been in the background collating all those thoughts and comments, and we'll go through some of those questions and discussion points, some really, really good ones. And I have to say the engagement has been fantastic. So thank you so much for that. Just going to look at some of the key takeaways that we feel helped sort of structure our presentation, and that we hope will help you kind of reflect and digest what we've been talking about today. But as I said, you will get everything as takeaways as well. Learning content analytics allows businesses to make better decisions and provide better learner experiences. That's what we're after. That's what we're hoping to help you achieve in this industry we work in and we share. It provides a broader and deeper picture of success and standard tracking and reporting. Matt's talked through some really good use case studies there, and Pete's talked through the science, the data. So I hope that's been clear as well. The barriers to adopting learning content analytics are falling. Those myths are being busted, we hope, and our solution, like Kineo Analytics, is there to help make that speedier and more efficient. We think in 4 dimensions, and that's really helped our approach from the very beginning of this journey on how to make sense of analytics and how to make best use of learning and the data you get from it. Those dimensions are, just to reiterate, data and insights, competence, perception, engagement, and reaction. And I know a lot of you have been talking about competence and perception particularly. There's a comment in about confidence, which I think we'll get back to later on, which is good in the chat. Somebody wants to pick up on that. And then lastly, live and learn. What worked? What didn't? Even failures provide useful insight. In fact, I'd say, we all learn by failing. So failures probably provide the best insight. And that's how we then design using those results and create better experiences using evidence-based decisions. Cool. I think that's it for now. Bit of Q&A. Alex, I'm going to bring you in if that's all right. Welcome.
Hi, Andy. Yes, thank you. Yeah, so we've had some good questions. Do keep adding your questions into the Q&A function if you've got anything you want to clarify or any other questions for the panel today. So I'll start by with a question that's come in from an anonymous attendee. So hello, whoever you are. But they ask, how many questions do learners tend to answer voluntarily after a course? I'd love to add a question to include everything mentioned across competence, perception, engagement, and reaction. But I'd rather only ask 3 or 4 questions and get a higher response. I think this is a great question because actually the benefit of Kineo Analytics is that you don't need to ask questions to get all of that data. So I'll pass to you. Who wants to answer that one from the team?
I think me and Pete can probably take that one. The way that we've looked at it, because as we said, Kineo Analytics is fairly new, is we're looking at 3 questions at the moment. We think that feels to us around about right, because as you said, Alex, we can capture a lot of information in the background just through the rest of the course and through the other questions we ask. But we've been looking at kind of 3 as a good number, but we might find, again, through the data, we can ask a bit more. We might find that one kind of big question at the end is more effective, but that's where we started from. Any other advance on that, Pete?
Well, yeah, context is everything though, isn't it? So you're right, Alex, when you're actually answering questions in the flow of a course and it feels quite natural, we tend to ask our feedback questions at the end, and that's also fairly natural but people are starting to lose attention. So yeah, Matt, you say three is the absolute maximum. If you're using your system to follow up with learners afterwards, so whether that's a poll that pops up immediately, or if you email them or contact them through some other route to fill out a survey afterwards, then you tend to get a much lower response rates, which is why we like trying to grab people in the course. So yeah, you might only get 20-30% of people actually answering anything.
Cool, thank you, Bo. Next question is from Bruno. Thank you, Bruno. He says, regarding perception or confidence, how do you control for false confidence? So people often think they know this stuff going in, but actually they don't, and maybe they don't even realize that until after the course.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting one. That's one of the reasons why we talk about perception rather than confidence, because confidence is just one element of perception as a whole. And yeah, it differs from person to person. Some people are innately confident. You've got social factors coming on into it. You've got job role. You've got all sorts of things which can contribute. So one person, my assessment of my own confidence being quite different to your assessment of your confidence, Alex. If you've got a large enough audience going through the course, it will naturally control itself anyway for that organization. But what is interesting to watch out for from the data is having a look at, if you're asking a confidence question at the start, have a look at the trends, because normally you'd want to see people's confidence in the subject matter increase, but you might build your course around the idea of challenging misconceptions which you think are available present in an organization. You might deliberately build a really difficult course in the subject matter so people feel less confident at the end of it. If it's something like I don't know, info security, phishing scams, everyone thinks they can spot a phishing email, so you panic them a bit, and you actually want the confidence to dip at that point, and then you can report on it. So it's context. It's all about having flexible reporting tools and then understanding what the results are actually telling you when you come to look at them and analyze them.
Yeah, Pete, just to build on that a little bit, I think we did some new leader training, and there's those people who think they're what's the model, consciously competent, unconsciously competent, et cetera, right? We want to ferret those people out. And so if you do that pre-test, that almost like a diagnostic, I might come into it and feel like I've really got these skills down, I know what I'm doing, but now you're faced with some really hard content and you realize, oh, actually, I don't know what I'm talking about, and I'm probably going to need to study up a little bit and take some more learning. Will Thalheimer, who's no longer with us on this call, but he talks about that as a focusing objective, right? Like you can ask these questions up front. It helps focus the learner on the experience. And at the end of the day, just to Pete's point, I might walk away from this training going, I've got a lot to learn. So my confidence actually dipped, but that's really what we want people to do. So there's lots of ways to think about that, but it's a really good question, Bruno. And thank you for asking that.
Yeah, and Bruno saying there, we're talking about the unconsciously incompetent.
Yeah, right.
Term for that.
I don't know what I don't know.
Very
but I think I know everything.
Exactly. I've got a question here from Stella. Stella, thank you for asking. I'm sure Andy will be very keen to answer this one. So how can we get more information on Kineo Analytics and particularly the cost?
Oh, interesting. Yes, thank you for that. I wonder where you were going to throw me there. Well, we have a slide for exactly that. Actually, I might as well get that out now. It's a bit more interesting than the Q&A slide. Any information you want, you can get in touch with us at info@kineo.com. I'm on LinkedIn, as are my colleagues here, I'm sure. Andy Costello, Matt Meller, Cami Bean, Pete Smith. You can find us there if you want to reach out to us, or the info@kineo.com email alias will get shifted out to us, and we'll go through each of them and answer those questions. You can follow Kineo on Twitter as well, and on LinkedIn, of course. But yeah, no, there's loads of information to be had. We will follow up with the slides with a recording and those sort of deeper dives. If you want to get more information, then yeah, do reach out to us and we'll have those conversations.
And to the question about price there, This is a free service that we are including for, we do a lot of custom content development at Kineo, if you don't know. So we are building this into any courses that we're building for our clients with Adapt, which is an open source responsive framework. And we do a lot of our content development with it. We want to help our clients crack the nut on better analytics. We see it as a real differentiator for us, and we're really excited about it. So that's kind of the offering. So we're not selling you anything.
Brilliant. Well, that's a really important point, and probably the most important on the call is the price, and I completely missed it. So thank you for that. Yeah. Yeah, a free service for that courses, and that's the point. I've started the webinar saying that, you know, our job for most of our clients is to make them heroes, and I know that sounds a bit trite and cheesy, but for L&D, there has been such a need to prove value and worth for so long, and especially now in times of economic struggle for so many, L&D is the one that often gets picked on first in organisations. So if we can help L&D show value to their businesses, then obviously it protects them, it protects the industry, and it shows the value for those initiatives that they bring, improving ultimately, of course, things like the learner performance, business performance, things like that. But you've got to start small, start on those early steps of proving the value of your learning content, which is what today's been about. Sorry, I'm guessing on that. Alex, have we got time for any more?
I think that's it. Actually, a great place to end. Thank you, Andy.
No worries. Any last thoughts, guys, from the team? Pete, Cami, Matt?
I would just say, Kineo, we are on a journey, right? We're like I said earlier, we're really trying to help crack the nut with our clients on this, and I think there's going to be a lot of evolution in this space. So we're really excited. We hope you come along with us. I think there's a lot of area for growth, and we all have a lot of capabilities to build in regard to data and analytics. So let's take care of each other along the way as we do that.
Absolutely. And just in the UK, we'll be at LearnTech in May, LearnTech in London in May, which is a big industry event over here. There'll be others in the US, of course, I know, and we'll be, you know, leading our conversation with analytics. So come and talk to us and keep the conversation going. It's a big thing at the moment, as it rightly should be. So hopefully we're making some sense to you, at the very least. A few more details for us there, and other ways of getting in touch with us. And thank you all for joining us. It's been a really lively conversation, and we look forward to the next one. We'll let you know when it is. All the best. Cheers all.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone.